In May of 2014, Dominion wrote to landowners in Nelson County on the route of the planned Atlantic Coast Pipeline, informing them of Dominion's intent to conduct surveys of the properties beginning in July of 2014. Connie, when did you first hear about this? What was your reaction? What was the reaction of your fellow Board of Supervisors? And did landowners start calling?
I first heard about it at a regular meeting of the Board of Supervisors on May 14th, if I recall correctly. We were sitting there conducting business and chatting around, and nothing had been in the packet, which we usually receive several days before the meeting. And then the county administrator got up and passed around a letter, which basically said Dominion was going to be looking at putting a natural gas pipeline right through our county. We all sat there and had to read it again because we hadn't read it before. We're like, what the heck? Now, I don't think any of the other supervisors had seen this letter earlier. I can't be sure of that, but everybody looked pretty stunned and startled about it. So I think we were all very upset, and of course it was like, oh my God, now what? How are we going to get more information? What should we do? And there was a lot of chatter about what the next steps ought to be. Everyone seemed to be upset, but I couldn't really gauge because one of the supervisors had laid pipe before, and she's like, oh, pipeline, big deal, you know, and whatever. And others were like, oh yeah, well maybe there'll be money for us, and you know, but that was just preliminary chatter. People seemed pretty upset about it. I think the worst thing for me was being accused later on by members of the public of having known about this and not let the public know, which was certainly not the case. I think we got the letter at the same time landowners did. Landowners did start calling some of the Board of Supervisors members, but it was unclear what to ask even. So I didn't get that many calls initially. Later on, of course, because actually one of the different routes, which kept changing, as we know, came fairly close to my neighborhood, and so people, you know, were pretty upset.
So, take it a couple of steps further. I mean, you started, obviously we know that landowners got together and started thinking about how to oppose this, or at least question it very heavily. So, what was the board's attitude toward the reaction that you were hearing from the community? And how did it evolve?
Yeah, well, of course, depending on your personality, if you were a Board of Supervisors member, you were either so keen to hear what people had to say, or you just kind of brushed it off and said, oh, well, you know, we don't really know, it's just no problem and stuff. Immediately, we set up a meeting with Dominion. And I don't know if you remember it, but we had a meeting at the auditorium at the new school, high school. And it was the Board of Supervisors over here, 5 of us at a table. The audience, there was a lot of interest, and that auditorium was pretty full. And then there was Dominion over on this side with about 15 different people, all of them looking very nervous. And this was a meeting in which there was no public participation. It was simply an opportunity for us to ask Dominion for some answers. And so we had all prepared some questions, and amazingly they could not answer a lot of the questions. Could not answer the questions. I mean, it was just infuriating. I think the next thing that happened after that was well, there were several other little meetings, and then there was the meeting with where FERC came. And that was another big meeting. But the public was there and they were invited to make comments. And you had to sign up to make your comments. And FERC sat there basically saying nothing. And we just sat there listening. I remember making a very passionate statement, which I now or later felt had no relevance whatsoever to what I was supposed to be saying. But it was still this emotional response, you know, to this project. We had no idea what it was going to really be.
And Ernie, you were among the property owners who received a letter.
Yes.
what was your reaction and what did you do?
Well, I actually heard about the pipeline before I received my letter.
Ha.
A week earlier, I was in Kentucky at a conference, but it was a pretty informal conference of individuals that work with different forest protection groups around the country, organized by Kentucky Heartwood, and at that time I was the chair of the Heartwood Board of Directors. And one of the people who was there, his name's Ryan Talbot, and he worked with Allegheny Defense Project in Pennsylvania. And I had worked with him on having Heartwood be a intervener on the Atlantic Sunrise Project, which Heartwood was involved with prior to anything happening with the Southeast Reliability Project, which became ACP. And we were having breakfast together, and he was looking at his laptop, and because he monitored all manner of things, both with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and other energy listservs about energy projects, because the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania is laced with pipelines, and he had been working on various strategies on trying to deal with the impacts on the national forest there. So he said, "Oh, look what this is," and there was actually a map, Southeast Reliability Project, it said, and it said that Duke Energy and Dominion had, that Duke Energy was putting out a request for proposals for such a pipeline that would connect West Virginia, go through Virginia, and down to North Carolina. And there was a map, and I took a look at it, and the first thing I noticed, of course, because we were talking about national forests, and I was there kind of representing, Virginia's national forests in wild Virginia, was that it was going to go right through the heart of the George Washington National Forest. And I looked at it, and I thought, well, I know what I'll be doing as soon as I get back home. I'm going to be having to deal with this. And it was interesting that I did see the way the route went, and I did see that it was going to go through somewhere around Nelson County, but I didn't give it a really, really close look. It was just kind of something in passing that happened, and we went on to other business that was going on. And then when I got back from my trip, I had the letter in the mailbox from Dominion. So I was kind of prepared for it, but I wasn't prepared for it to be, the hometown issue it became.
So, did you start talking to other landowners?
I think I talked to Kathy Verslois, because she's a neighbor, and the original route was going to cross her property and mine. I think we got on the phone and talked together. And I may have spoken with a few other people before that initial Board of Supervisors meeting, but I remember that there were a lot of people speaking out during public comments at that meeting, which was the first one after people had gotten their letters. And after the meeting, there were maybe 10 or a dozen folks that just got together in the hallway after the meeting, and we discussed what we were going to do, and we all kind of realized that we were going to have to do something locally, because the fact that the Board of Supervisors didn't know anything about it really, it became obvious that we were going to have to do some real proactive work to try to, number one, get information, number two, to find out ways that we could try to keep it from happening.
In terms of getting information, That's a job. Tell us about that. I mean, you knew that the route was going through Nelson County, and you knew that it was going through your property and Kathy's property, and maybe some other people's property. When did the route start to become really clear, and how did you find out what the route was?
I think we assumed that that was it at the time. So, in reality, they were just lines on a map, and Dominion really had no idea where they were going to put the pipeline, except that it was going to go from point A to point B to point C, and there was going to have to be a couple of compressor stations along the line, and they would work out all the details later, which is kind of the story they gave us. But for all practical purposes, I think we all assumed that, that if you got a letter, you were ground zero, and that was what was going to happen. So to gather information, because I was already familiar with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission process, I had information that really nobody else did at that time, and I really think that was my most important part in the whole thing, was that not only did I have some knowledge about what the process was and ways that the public could be involved and how they could have legal standing in the case, because I was aware of that already, I was able to contact my friends who had also done similar work, and we talked about how to do that. And very soon we got we came up with the strategy to have as many local people as possible sign up on the FERC side as interveners, and that was really the first thing that I was really heavily involved with, was trying to recruit as many people as we possibly could for that in Nelson.
And the process of being an intervener is something that, we're doing this so that we can inform other communities that might get faced with the same issue. What does being an intervener do for you?
Well, if you are going to have any impact to yourself or have any interest in this at all, and that's a very vague description, although sometimes a court will throw it out if they say you didn't really have standing. So if you are a property owner that's going to be directly impacted on it, if you're an adjoining landowner that might be impacted by it, if you live in a county where it might affect property values, if it might affect the groundwater in your area, then you've got standing. And if you do, you file through a very complicated process with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. You can do it online. And then if you are diligent, and if you continue to be part of the process for as long as it takes to get to the point to where lawsuits can be filed, and of course that's many years down the line, if you've been diligent all the way through, then you can have legal standing to be one of those people to file a lawsuit, and we knew that the county and the individuals in the county were going to have to be involved in that.
So the Board of Supervisors had some contact with FERC from that first FERC meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have further contact, and how did Nelson County become an official intervener?
I believe so. Yeah, Steve Carter anyway was, and I know I was. And of course then there's just a deluge of emails from everybody who submitted anything to FERC would come through. I think you were probably an intervener as well. But trying to get information about the pipeline was like pulling teeth. I remember that big meeting that Dominion had. We were so hopeful that then everybody, who had come to some of the other meetings and wasn't able to really ask questions of Dominion would now have an opportunity. We could all go and people would ask questions. They sabotaged it by setting up tables, different stations. So when you went in, if you wanted to find out about landslides or something, you went to this table, so that nobody got the same information. I remember going over to the woman who did the initial layout. I said, why did you select this route? She said, well, we knew we were going to start here and be here, so we just drew a line like that. I mean, she admitted it. I mean, that was, no flyovers, no anything. It was just like this. Now, I think somebody had probably realized that going through Albemarle County would be a disaster, and Nelson County, this little podunk country rural place with 12,000 people, would probably not mind too much. And I think that's why they came straight down. And of course, they changed the route later on. But I went to many meetings trying to get information. I remember I was on the Chamber of Commerce because I was trying to bring a little bit of a different perspective to the chamber, which was just, anyway. The Dominion guy came. A Dominion guy had been invited to come and talk to the chamber about all the economic benefits that this would bring, the pipeline would bring to businesses. And I asked him, I said, okay, so you're saying there are going to be jobs. How many permanent jobs will Nelson County have after this pipeline is built? And he looked at me and he said, none. Well, that's not the kind of information they were putting out, of course, And we all knew that there would be a lot of jobs for construction, but nothing for people afterwards. I mean, we were kind of shocked about that. So just getting information was just, I've never seen an organization be so, I don't know if devious is the right word, but dismissive probably of questions and working around them and not answering them. I'm sure you had that experience too. But then we did that, you were part of this. And Ernie, you can tell me because I can't quite remember. A bunch of us got together and decided that we were going to take matters into our own hands and we were going to go to FERC and tell them the real story. And you, Woody, put together a beautiful booklet for us and a PowerPoint. And there were a bunch of us. And I don't think Friends of Nelson had been formed by this time or exactly what happened. But there were maybe 8 or 10 of us that were involved in that. Charlotte Ray, Janice Jackson, Woody, Jim Bolton, Reverend Rose, Charlie Hickox, myself, Susan McSwain. And we put together this wonderful presentation, and we actually got an appointment at FERC to meet in person with a panel. We thought, well, when we got up there, 5 of us went, Reverend Rose, Charlie, myself, Charlotte, and Janice. We all got in the car and went up there. When we got there, we were told we would be meeting with Norman Bay, who was one of the FERC commissioners and happened to be a lovely man, actually. And then we were put into a room where the audiovisual didn't work, so we couldn't use our PowerPoint, which was highly irritating, but we had our books that we used, and we made our presentation, and we thought, well, we really made an impact now. But I can't remember why was this before Friends of Nelson? This might have been in like October 2014.
Let's talk about the formation of Friends of Nelson.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what
I
the timeline is exactly. Yeah. My impression is that Friends of Nelson was forming at the same time this was happening.
I mean, one of the things that we realized we were going to have to do was create an organization, because if we had a local community organization, we would have standing as that organization. So, so some of us started working on creating a nonprofit, and of course that's a process in and of itself, one that I was familiar with. And Kathy Bonham helped with that. She was one of the people that helped organize that. She was a retired attorney, and but we also realized that the information that we were going to need, we were going to have to generate ourselves. It was not, we were not going to be able to look to someone else to have that information for us. So we actively started, figuring out exactly what we had to do and getting the information about, the packet that Connie referred to, with all of the photos and information about Hurricane Camille, the Davis Creek area, and the history in Nelson County was one piece of that.
Did Dominion ever I mean, you spoke about what the guy said to the Chamber of Commerce. Did the Dominion ever offer anything to the Board of Supervisors or say things to the Board of Supervisors to try to convince you that this would be good for the county?
I don't think in any kind of formal way. I mean, you know, we would call them up and ask them various things, and then they would put out the propaganda about the great $25 million, is that what it was supposed to be, of revenue the county could expect, or that was the average that localities would get from the natural gas pipeline taxes or whatever, you know, they were going to do, and all the property taxes. No, they would just send out periodical things. They never asked for anything particular. It was suggested.
Never offered you any
No.
specifics?
No.
Because I remember them saying, you know, you're going to realize $1 million a year in taxes, but nobody could answer the question at the courthouse, how did that figure, where does that figure come from? And don't pipelines depreciate in value over the years?
Yeah.
So
It was all smoke and mirrors, the whole thing was. It really was. It was suggested to me by an attorney who was a friend of mine who knew a lot of the Dominion people that we should start asking, you know, for something like a swimming pool. And I said to him, are you kidding me? We want them to go away. We don't want to ask them for, what? You know, I was just outraged by that suggestion, you know, that we would even lower ourselves to get into that kind of a conversation. I don't know what the other supervisors were doing. There were two of us who were all right from the beginning adamantly opposed to this on several levels, not just because it was through Nelson County, but because of the lack of need and all this other stuff. So it was sort of ourselves against the other three, although one of the supervisors actually said in the beginning, this is the worst thing that's happened to Nelson County since Hurricane Camille. And that was the last time he said anything as strong as that. And then he kind of wavered back and forth about things, and getting the resolutions passed that we did was like pulling teeth too. It was just...
Were there approaches either, this is before you got on the board, but were there approaches early on to state officials, federal representatives, trying to get help from a state senator or a delegate or a congressman?
Yeah, I was asked to contact Tim Kaine and Mark Warner, since I knew them both from all my political shenanigans in the past. And I called Mark Warner's office, and actually I was called up there the first time to have a meeting with Dominion and Mark Warner, at which we sat down and Dominion asked me, well, Connie, is there any place in Nelson County that would be better than this particular route? I said, absolutely not. But then I didn't get to meet with the senator at that time, but then later I called up and asked for a meeting with him, and I got an appointment, and this is kind of a fun thing for me. He called me up and he said, well, Connie, I want you to come to my house because I've got various things going on. And so I actually went to Mark Warner's house, and he and I had a fireside chat, which did absolutely no good, of course, but it was very entertaining. Later on in the course of the thing, he did call me and ask me to organize a meeting in Charlottesville, which I helped do. I don't know if you came to that with Spencer Phillips and a bunch of other people, so I helped him organize that. Tim Kaine, I went to visit him in his office, and he was very interested, but he didn't really, wasn't sure what he would like to say about that. And then he too asked me to help him organize a couple of meetings. There was one in Richmond. I don't know if you went to that one. And I don't know, maybe there was another one, I don't know. They were interested, but they weren't forthcoming with any particular thing. I think Tim got a little more interested later on, but you probably could speak to that.
Besides the meetings that you mentioned, we had numerous meetings with Senator Kaine's aides, with Senator Warner's aides, and clearly Senator Kaine was the most responsive of any elected official in terms of actually welcoming our input and taking steps that he felt he could on our behalf. You know, one of the things about this is that everybody except us saw this as that it was a done deal. There was never any consideration that it possibly couldn't happen. So because of that, it was never in Dominion's best interests to reach out to the community or provide information or to do anything, you know, on behalf of anyone but itself. So, and we of course realize that. Again, why Friends of Nelson looked at generating specific information, the economic report that we had done, the geology and the soil study that we did. This is information that you would think would be something that would be required of a project of this magnitude and this impact, but of course that's not the case. So
Expand on that a little bit, because you know, for anybody who's tuning into this and wants to know what measures were taken, that was an important step that I'm assuming Friends of Nelson commissioned that study.
correct, we did. And in fact, it was interesting, we contacted an independent economic firm, Keylog, to do an economic study for Nelson County.
Yeah.
On what the impacts to the county would be from the pipeline and the proposed pipeline. And as that project developed, it became clear that we weren't the only county that was going to need to have this analysis done. It eventually became one that included Augusta and Buckingham counties. And so in this case, as happened, you know, as was indicative, Friends of Nelson was taking leadership in things that other counties were able to, and individuals were able to benefit from, and all of a sudden we weren't just Nelson County, we were a larger body of people fighting the same fight together, and the networking that we did with Augusta County and with Buckingham County were huge. And also all the way to the West Virginia border. So the things that we were learning along the way and the things that we were putting forth on our own behalf became, you know, region-wide strategies.
There was, you know, there were so many things going on. I remember working with Nancy Sorrells and a couple other people, Tracy Piles and some other people in Augusta, and trying to figure out how to use language that would draw in the anti-tax and property rights people. And I don't think we had that much success. But one thing I just wanted to mention that came up that I think would be so helpful for other organizations. Boards of Supervisors have an enormous amount on their plates. And there is no way that any individual supervisor could possibly get the information that he or she needed to really understand some of the issues related to the pipeline. And I think it was Nancy who suggested that we form an inter-county organization that could provide information, that we would be there to educate all the different boards of supervisors. And I was asked to find out if this was legal, because I was on the Virginia, Board of Supervisors state organization. So I called up their attorney, and they said we had no legal right to form such an official committee. But I always thought it would have been so helpful for someone to work on a given individual and educate us, and not just in Nelson County, but in all the different counties, because it was just too much to know. And everybody got tired, you know, and we didn't know what to do with it. And so I think Joyce was suggesting that she could be helpful in that respect too, which I'm sure she could have. But the board really they were so divided that we didn't really have much luck with that.
Did your board pay much attention to the study, Ernie?
The Spencer Phillips, the logistics, that, nope, under the table. Thought it was full of holes, and Dominion tried to trash it too, you know, by saying, oh no, property taxes aren't going, you know, won't go down. Oh, for heaven's sake, property won't be devalued. I mean, you know, no, nobody paid attention to it.
So you're having to deal with, trying to deal with political avenues of pressure. Let's turn to the legal side of things. Because in my opinion, ultimately it was the legal strategy that ended up working.
Yeah.
And how do you see the legal strategy evolving, or how did it come about? Where did the ideas that framed that strategy come from?
Well, I mentioned previously the intervener scenario, which would give standing to those individuals, and one of the things legally is that to be able to have standing in court, you must exhaust your administrative remedies. And so the FERC process is considered that. So if you did not become an intervener and be part of that process and then see it from the beginning all the way until a lawsuit would be filed on your behalf or by you, you'd have no legal standing. And that, you know, those cases like that get thrown out all the time. There have been many people that have tried to bring lawsuits against pipelines, and the aspects of the case, as important as they are, never get heard because the people don't have standing. So that was something that we knew early on. We also knew from the National Environmental Policy Act that was going to be the law that was going to have the most clout legally, because that law says that if there's a federal project, if there's a project that impacts federal land, that analysis has to be done about what the environmental impacts of that are. And they must also consider the no action alternative. So to compare those two is part of what the NEPA process is. And the NEPA process for a pipeline, which has to be done through FERC, and the NEPA process for a national forest are actually different. They actually have different standards. And those are coordinated by the Council for Environmental Quality, which is the administrative, they're part of the administration, they're administrative office. They're the ones that have jurisdiction over NEPA, which makes them pretty unique. Congress gave them that ability. So that's, we knew that was going to be key. And we had people with experience interacting with the NEPA process and national forests. I had experience, Southern Environmental Law Center, Sierra Club, NRDC, all of these organizations are very familiar with how NEPA works, how it works in the courts and such. So that was the main legal strategy. There was another one that had to do with FERC's ability to grant eminent domain if there's not a need for the project. That was another legal avenue that never reached resolution. It could have. There was the legal fight, which was unique to Nelson County, which was the Clean Water Act doesn't allow you to build a pipeline through designated wetlands, and Dominion had to request a variance, and our our Board of Zoning Authority actually denied variances to go through the wetlands in Nelson County. That was the result of some lawsuits, and there were still aspects of that case that were still pending when the project was canceled.
Right.
It turns out there were lots of legal open ends, any one of which could have, could have been perhaps significant. The fact that there were so many, the lawsuit in Buckingham County, with the cultural and historical values of the Union Hill, that came up much later in all this, but that was really huge to be able to get an air quality permit there.
Yeah.
For a compressor station. So we had a lot of different legal avenues, and none of them ever reached, a determination, which of course, if you don't want bad rulings on the books, you have to pull the plug, because otherwise you'll have bad rulings that can be applied across the board in other projects. And and we all understood that, and so we knew that the only way that this project was going to be stopped was going to be if Dominion, Duke Energy pulled the plug on it. Because they weren't going to let it be stopped anywhere else if there was a chance it was going to happen.
Yeah.
When was the decision to start revising the floodplain ordinance made? And how does it play into this whole thing?
Well, we'd been working on the floodplain ordinance for a couple of years, and like so many different things, nothing was going on, nothing was happening. And then we had this dynamic young zoning administrator, Tim Patalino. And Vicki Wheaton contacted me, and we started just chatting about the floodplain ordinance and how we needed to get it done. And Tim was like, yeah, we should get this thing done, get it off the books. And it had come to the Board of Supervisors several times and sent back because of different things. And the last time it was ready to go, Vicki and I worked this out, and Vicki spent a great deal of time contacting the DCR people to get all, it's complicated, but there are all these different things that you can put into a floodplain ordinance that gives you a better deal for your citizens that I'm not even going to go into. But there were a few things in there that I thought, well, let's just do this. One of them was not allowing anything like natural gas to cross over a stream, to go through a stream. The other was not putting anything from someplace else as fill into a stream, because we'd heard about coal ash and all sorts of horrible stuff going into streams as fill for some pipelines and whatever. And Tim said, well, I'll put it in there, but it's never going to fly. Never happening. Not going to happen. I said, just put it in there. He put it in there, and because that ordinance had come through the supervisors so many times and nobody sort of noticed that we put in these restrictions that were very important, it passed. Later on, Tommy Harvey says, I never passed that. No, I didn't vote that. I said, well, you signed it. Whatever. And I think that had a big impact, that we really put these things in that a variance is requested for, and they were going to have to do a variance for every crossing. And that wasn't going to happen. And then the lawsuit started related to that.
And it was related to FEMA standards too, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. Yeah, and that was one of the big reasons that we were able to keep it moving, was that, if you put in certain things, that your citizens who own lands in floodplains can get a special deal on their insurance, floodplain insurance. So that's just a simplified way of saying it. But that was one of the motivators to keep it moving, that we use. Oh, look, it's going to be good for our citizens, and just pushed it right on through. But we'd been working on it for a while, before it became obvious that we could really tighten it up.
Yeah, I remember a time years ago when every time floodplain ordinance came up, the reference was to Camille,
Mm-hmm.
because what had happened. And so defining where the floodplain went became a point of contention, whether or not Camille was a one-time worst-case scenario that will never happen again, or something we could expect to happen more frequently than that, and therefore our floodplain ordinance needs to take that into account. Did you have to deal with that issue when you got on the board?
I would basically say no. I was a part of, I was a supervisor during the legal challenge that the county had to defend itself from being sued by Dominion.
That's right.
So, I was in direct contact with our attorney, an excellent attorney, and she did a fabulous job with that.
She did it.
The judge was as dismissive to the arguments presented as he could have been. Because again, it's the done deal scenario. There's no, the only way something gets a fresh look is to present the information in a fresh way, new information, and then make sure it gets into the right hands. Dominion never even applied for many of those variances. So it was clear that they had hit a roadblock there. I don't know that it was clear to us at the time, but again, because there were so many pieces of this, that was a significant one. Another one that I'd really like to mention, because you were talking about your attorney friend who said, let's get a swimming pool out of this.
Mm-hmm.
Very early on, there was another piece of this, or the cultural and historical values of the county.
Oh, yeah.
Connie worked really hard on that. And as that went forth, by the time I got on the Board of Supervisors, the idea of mitigation came up.
Mm-hmm.
And I had talked to, and Connie and I worked on this a little bit prior to that time, and we did something that I think is fairly unique and fairly significant, is that the county never acknowledged that mitigation was possible, that the damages that were going to be done in Wingina, in the Rockfish Valley, that those cultural and historical areas, you could not mitigate away the damage that would be done to those. And language to that effect was in county comments to FERC. And again, the supervisors did not pay much attention to the details and the minutiae of all these things. They just couldn't. Neither the county administrator nor the supervisors could. But fortunately, there were people who were, and Connie was the conduit for that, with the floodplains and with the cultural and historical things. And then when Connie was stepping down from the board, it became really important that somebody do that, and it presented an opportunity for me to to be a person on the inside of the county that had access to all that minutia and all of those details, because then we could use them to some extent and although there was always disagreement on the Board of Supervisors and often resistance from the county administrator, there was still someone who could provide the push, the incentive, the knowledge, the
Right.
language, the process, getting everything in the right place. And it was a tool that really the other counties wouldn't have, you know, they didn't have. They had people that were no longer on the board that were very, very, very helpful, Nancy Sorrells and Tracy for sure. But to
Ernie-
some extent, you know, the Board of Supervisors and the county administrator at that point kind of deferred things to me. You know, they didn't want to work on them. The last thing they wanted to do was spend time and brain matter on taking care of it, which of course I was really eager to do. But then I had to figure out how to get it through.
Right.
Yeah.
If somebody else had been elected to the board, besides Ernie, who came with this huge amount of knowledge and experience, I don't know what we would have done. We would have just probably done not much of anything. But the whole NEPA thing, I will tell you, FERC or whoever, I guess FERC is responsible for the NEPA thing, it was like it never came up. And then finally I was talking to Rick Cornelius or something, because he used to work for NEPA. And he said, well, what about this? They're supposed to have public comments and public meetings about this thing. So I asked Steve Carter, I said, what? Where are they weren't even having any. And so we insisted on having them. And that really was very helpful in terms of our historic districts. But it was just like, I mean, the whole thing was almost like a bad dream, you know, all the things that went wrong or didn't happen or should have happened. Or
The information you were getting on the mitigation of the cultural and historic, that was coming from people on the historical society.
yes, indeed it was.
Andy Wright and Bob Carter promised. And talk a little bit about what they were saying about those communities through which the route was going.
What's to say? I don't know. I mean, they were all, you know, Andy was just, well, you were involved with that as well, as I can remember. And the lovely man who owned the Lowesville Mill, what was that gentleman's name? We had meetings all over the place about these things. I mean, all these communities were, especially the one in Wingina, I think. Well, and also the one in Rockfish Valley, there were communities of color, and there was old stuff going on down there that had not been researched, that had not been, you know, documented. And so it was a wonderful opportunity for the Historic Society to really, you know, get all that together and to have these historic districts established. It was really, it was a community building thing.
Yeah, I give the credit to Bob Carter, who had worked for the Department of Historic Resources and knew that by getting Warminster declared eligible to be an historic district, set up certain barriers that could be used to argue for mitigation.
In Nelson County, we had a really an amazing community of individuals with knowledge and expertise and desire and determination that that was just remarkable. And you know, each one of these people that brought something to the table, you know, whether it was someone who was able to write a check to get the economic study done, you know, that we had that. We had Peter Agelesto.
We did.
In
I was thinking
the
about
Rockfish
him.
Valley, who was able to really, you know, really work tirelessly on the historical values there. We had people that refused to accept payment for an easement on their property. There were very few of those people anywhere along the pipeline route. We had a few of those in Nelson County that were very, very important. And of course, now to this day, they don't have an easement on their property, and they're the only ones that don't.
And they spent a lot of money to keep it that way too,
Yeah.
which is sad.
Yes. We had people that did a lot of work under the radar. We had people that had that were able to just show up week after week, month after month, you know, and didn't go away. The people that were part of Friends of Nelson are just an amazing team of people, and it was very much a team. But Nelson County had a history of really stepping forth and advocating for itself, and I think the one thing that we had in Nelson County that made it so successful is really the fact that there's something very special about this county. Whether the fact that all of these people are here makes it very special. Something very special drew these people here or nurtured them here. There is a real common, real head and heart thing going on in Nelson County that keeps some of the worst things at bay and gives us a lot of opportunities to do the right thing, because we have individuals and skills and the heart that that in other places is just probably each place has their own unique characteristics. We had something that just kind of
Special.
works here. It's
Yeah.
very special.
Yeah. I think Friends of Nelson really was the unifying organization in terms of being there for everything. And for everything that came up, there was always somebody who could research something or find out about something. And then all the different organizations just used that knowledge and experience, which I thought was just great.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I know Ron was interested in this too from his questions. Did it help or hurt to have not just Friends of Nelson, but Friends of Wintergreen, the Pipeline Education Project, the Free Nelson? There were 5 or 6 groups that were. Was that good or bad?
Oh, it was absolutely good, and I really I'm speaking from I guess maybe for myself, but in my work with Heartwood, I've worked with lots of forest protection groups who have different strategies to do what they do in the different areas where they are, and so I had experience mediating people that had difficulties about strategy and how to do things, but yet try to keep everybody on the same page, working in the same direction. And there was a huge effort. So many people said, we should just have one big movement, one big group that does everything. And I didn't think that was really a good strategy. And one of the things that we did as a group was to acknowledge the value of each of those groups. Not that we didn't get into instances where we were butting heads or getting ready to throw things at each other, but there was always an acknowledgement that the diversity was really a strength for all of us, and if we could all keep moving in the same direction, even if we didn't agree on the strategies, each piece of that would bring a strategy that the other group didn't have, and so it made us stronger. And I just know that, to answer your question affirmatively, yes, it was a huge thing.
It was a huge thing. I think there were an occasional discrepancy in, maybe not focus so much, but in philosophy. There were, there were a couple of groups that were like, we just want them to move the pipeline out of our community, the whole NIMBY thing. And then there were the absolutely, we cannot have a pipeline, period, nowhere, no place, at any time. And so there were occasional sort of, it took a little bit of maneuvering to get these different groups to kind of agree that we were all working together to find a solution and eventually to get rid of the pipeline. I think that was the bottom line. But Friends of Wintergreen was an interesting organization because they were initially kind of NIMBY, you know, especially when it started to come down over the mountain right through their resort. But then in the end, they sort of realized that that was not a strategy that was going to work and kind of backed off a little bit.
If any one of those strategies worked out, everybody won.
Yeah.
So the fact that you didn't agree with it, you know, we had people that were working on a national level, and we're networking with people all over the country that were fighting pipelines in Pennsylvania and in Oregon and in Louisiana. And so there are groups that work nationally on opposing pipelines and working on systemic changes to FERC, for instance. So this was all part of our network as well. You know, so we had many strong alliances in this web that we were involved in.
Any questions you want to fire at them?
One we're sort of talking about now.
And when you answer to Woody, so that you're not looking over there.
Oh, right, okay.
Sorry.
I'd like to ask a question and give you the opportunity to be off the record and not be filmed and recorded.
Oh, later on, you mean?
No, right now.
Oh.
You can just pause it.
It would mess up the time track. It'd be better to do everything on record first, then off record after.
Okay.
Well, okay. Do you have it on record?
I have no.
Okay.
Based on all the experiences that you have, now that we've stopped this pipeline, somewhere down the road, somebody calls you from another locality, perhaps in another state, saying, I just got this letter from some corporation that wants to come do some kind of a project for my property. They have the right of eminent domain. And, what should I do? And what should I do in the first month? What advice would you give?
Well, I've been in that position because I have someone who was a friend of a friend who contacted me from Kentucky about a natural gas pipeline that's going to cross through a forest there, which is a privately owned old growth forest, and it's a pipeline that's only going to serve one large business in the area. And so we got into a really long discussion about, you know, what we might do to help. And really what it kind of came down to is that there's 7 or 8 venues that are really, really, really important, but I think the most important part of Friends of Nelson was the community that was dealing with all those different parts. If you can get somebody paying attention to each of those things, you've got an amazing community that even if you lose the fight, you're going to win because you have something in place that will continue to serve the community even after this threat has either realized or gone away or been mitigated or whatever happens. So that to me, you know, when I was talking to her, I said, if you can find enough people to pay attention to each of those things, you know, you may end up having to do, you know, 10 of the 12 yourself until someone catches up with you. And that's the normal thing that happens, is you have 1 or 2 people that are doing everything. Again, we had a lot of hands doing a lot of work, you know. I can't say many hands make light work, because it was never light work. But it was always, you know, we always had, the result of that now is a community in Nelson County which is clearly more aware, more informed, more alert, and stronger.
And what advice would you give if you've got a call like that?
Well, the same thing, and I would hope, and it's so critical and it just doesn't happen sometimes, that every community needs to find its leaders. And that doesn't necessarily mean government leaders either, because government is complicated. As I said before, government leaders have so much to deal with. So finding people in the community, having an organization already in place, which doesn't really help somebody calling and asking a question about what do I do now. But often communities will have some organization of some sort that could be like a basis for getting information out. I would love to see us do a rural Nelson model again, and would wish that for every community, to have somebody who pays attention to what's going on in a community and inform people, the public, because it's very difficult to find out stuff. I think also contacting your local government is important if somebody's hearing about something like that. Contacting them, contacting their personal supervisor for sure, that's the first thing, and finding out what that person knows and asking that person to get more information about it, because you're going to have to deal with the local government. So that's what I would do. But I mean, we are blessed to live in a place where there are so many wonderful people who came together in different ways, to fight this pipeline. And I don't know what you would do in an urban area. I can't even imagine it, but just try to find some leaders to galvanize interested people, particularly if your land is involved. I mean, that is a critical element and unifying thing. If your land is being threatened, if your property is being threatened, or your water supply, or whatever. Yeah.
I'd say the other thing is that, you need people who are willing to, to not go away, to commit to the long haul.
Yeah.
Because the longer you're able to keep the process going so that it moves slowly instead of quickly, you have many opportunities for other aspects that you never considered being relevant to come into play. Whether it be, it could be almost anything, but that little bit of magic that can happen when you pursue something long enough, where all of a sudden there is, all of a sudden, climate is a big deal. All of a sudden, on a federal level, they're paying attention to methane. When we started this, nobody, methane was not an issue anywhere, and now it's considered, one of the biggest, one of the biggest threats for our climate that there is. Things that, if you're doing the right thing, and of course you get involved in this because you are doing the right thing. If you do it, then you have to, I think, trust the process. That the process, number one, is more important than the end, but you got to keep moving towards it, because the good that's going to come out of that is going to be, you may succeed and you might fail, but you're going to win a lot along the way, and everyone's going to be better off for it. So, it's a great way to spend your time. It's a privilege to be involved in this kind of stuff, and to be able to be a part of it. And it's one of the most important things that I think you can pass on to other people is that magic happens, but you've got to be the vehicle to make it happen. If it won't happen because you sat around and waited.
I think the other thing, though, you have no idea how long something's going to go on. And we're a bunch of old hippies, so we really love a fight. And I think another key thing is trying to involve younger people. But younger people are busy people, too, with their families and their new lives. And it's finding people, we were so lucky to have someone like you, Ernie, and all the folks that came into Friends of Nelson with more time and energy. But you may not always have that in the community, and so finding those people is critical.
Young people found ways to plug in.
Yeah.
There were there were young people on bicycles traveling the route of the pipeline and talking to people along the way.
Yep.
There were podcasts that were happening in Richmond and other places that people.
Harrisonburg of all places.
Yeah, to do that. Someone rode their horse along on the route of the pipeline.
Love
University climate action people were very supportive and got involved in all sorts of things around this. So there were many opportunities for young people to plug in places where they had, where they had the ability to do it.
Yeah, the only thing I was really, of course, that's true, but you need some people who have a little experience in organizing things, if you can find them, to keep things together, because otherwise people can be coming in and out. And young people often are in and out.
Very much.
Very intense for their part, and then they're off to the rest of their lives. So I think, I guess if I were to tell anybody anything, just in general, find your community leaders and
Or become one yourself.
or become one yourself. Yeah, and then
Because there's nothing. So many of the people in leadership positions that never considered themselves
Exactly.
to be in that role before then, or even that they were going to be one.
Yeah.
They just showed up over and over and over and over,
Yeah.
and then by example, that's them.
On the same time, the group that organized it, there are a lot of models. There are nonprofits that usually are started by a person, a founder, and there's a lot of literature on how to form one. There's a lot of the same thing in the for-profit sector. There's individuals and how to form a business. But in our case, and in any other community's case, we're talking about some problem that comes out of nowhere. And you suddenly have a large number of people that never agree on anything normally, fighting the same battle. How do you organize that? How do you pick the leaders? And there's not literature on how to do this.
Well, someone either has to volunteer or you have to kick someone to the front that's willing. There's organizing principles, I guess, that are part of putting together, an effective movement or whatever it is. If you're going to need money, if you're going to need, if you need to be represented legally, there's things that you have to do. You have to create a form that will do those things. We were going to need money. We became a nonprofit. We knew we were going to have to be involved legally so that we could be represented. We created a board and a board of directors. That was just the form that, at the time, the people that got together decided that we were going to need. And a lot of people, once that was what the focus became for that group of people, then some of them went away, some of them started pursuing their own strategies. But that was just the one that we did because we knew those were the resources we were going to need. And everybody that stayed agreed that that's what what we were going to do. And again, we had some experience with people that was really important. We had some financial resources in the environmental grant community, which was absolutely vital. Again, we just we happened to have the right people in the right place that could access that. We had the one or two angels that could write a big check when we needed it. We had we had someone who knew something about GIS and could fly a drone. We just had all these pieces that made it work.
Yeah, I don't think, just to your question, that you can figure out a model for how to start something like this, because this was huge, and we were lucky because we had so many people in our community with various talents. But there were other, like Friends of Wintergreen, they just sort of got together, and of course they had a lot of financial resources, and they did their thing. Then we had the All Pain No Gain group, which again was led by a strong person, who came out with all kinds of ideas and strategies, and then it was go out and get money kind of thing. So I don't know if you can figure out how you would say this is the model you should have, because it really takes a core of good people to get it started, and if you're not lucky enough to have them, then somebody's got to go get them.
So I think, speaking to that, is when that first group of people, gathered together in the hallway at the courthouse, what have we got? What do we have here that we can work with? What's each person willing to do? What skills do they have? You got to start with what you have.
That's right.
And then you find out what you don't have, and then try to find out how to piece that all together. But
Yeah.
so many communities have failed where we were fortunate, and it's not from want of trying or desire or so many of the things that we would share with them.
So the title of this should be, There's Something About Nelson County.
Well, it's true. Don't you meet people who say they came here because the crystals attracted them, and there was
Joe
something?
Campbell's line, he says, it's the Nelsonite that's drawing us all here.
Well, if you don't have the place to protect, then who gives a shit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you live in an asphalt jungle, you have your family and you have your culture and you have your people, but we're fortunate. We have something that is really special.